Okay, I'm going to talk about an essay by G.K. Chesterton called The Ethics of Ellfland. It was written in 1908 in a book called Orthodoxy. It's my favorite essay, and I have many favorite essays, but this is my favorite. It's in this essay, Chesterton is going to develop what he calls his fairy tale philosophy. Let me read the very beginning so you get a sense of the tone of the essay. When the businessman rebukes the idealism of the office boy, it is commonly in some such speech as this: "Ah, yes, when one is young, one has these ideals in the abstract, and these castles in the air, but in middle age they all break up like clouds, and one comes down to a belief in practical politics, to using the machinery one has and getting on with the world as it is." And Chesterton says that's all wrong. He says when he grew up, he never lost his ideals. He never lost the ideals. He said the ideals are as powerful as they ever were. He says the vision is always a fact. It is the reality that is often a fraud. As much as I ever did, more than I ever did, I believe in liberalism. There was a rosy time of innocence when I believed in liberals. Liberals are people. He's not talking about Republicans and Democrats. Liberals are people. They're fallible. They're going to disappoint you. He says, the ideal, the vision, liberalism, democracy, judges us. We don't judge it. I think of Plato. Plato's ideas were forms, these abstract, ideal entities that were ultimately what is real, like justice and beauty and truth. For Plato, these are timeless, eternal, real entities that exist. Beauty, truth, justice. They judge us. We don't judge them. Chesterton says this: I take this instance, and he's talking about liberalism, his belief, his bias, he calls it. My only bias is, he wants to make it clear what his bias is. He believes in liberalism. He'll tell you exactly what he means by that. I take this instance of one of the enduring faiths because, having now to trace the roots of my personal speculation, that's what he's going to do in this essay. He's going to trace the roots of his personal speculation, his personal philosophy. He says, his belief in liberalism, may be counted, I think, as the only positive bias. I was brought up a liberal and have always believed in democracy, in the elementary liberal doctrine of a self-governing humanity. So, if anyone finds the phrase vague or threadbare, I can only pause for a moment to explain that the principle of democracy, as I mean it, can be stated in two propositions. The first is this: that the things common to all men are more important than the things peculiar to any men. Ordinary things are more valuable than extraordinary things. Nay, they are more extraordinary. Man is more awful than men, something more strange. The sense of the miracle of humanity itself should be always more vivid to us than any marvels of power, intellect, art, or civilization. He said, this is the first principle of democracy, that the essential things in men are the things they hold in common, and not the things they hold separately. And the second principle is merely this: that the political instinct or desire is one of these things which they hold in common. Falling in love is more poetical than dropping into poetry, The democratic contention is that government helping to rule the tribe is a thing like falling in love and not a thing like dropping into poetry. So that's the two principles of democracy. The two principles of democracy, or liberalism. The first is that the things common to all men are more important than the things they hold separately. And the second is that the political instinct or desire is one of these things. And he then goes on to show that democracy is not opposed to tradition. So he's going to argue that democracy and tradition are actually the same idea. He says, there is one thing that I have never from my youth up been able to understand. I have never been able to understand where people get the idea that democracy was in some way opposed to tradition. He says, tradition may be defined as the extension of the franchise. Tradition means giving votes to the most obscure of all classes, our ancestors. It is the democracy of the dead. Tradition refuses to submit to the small and arrogant oligarchy of those who merely happen to be walking about. All Democrats object to men being disqualified by the accident of birth. Tradition objects to their being disqualified by the accident of death. Democracy tells us not to neglect a good man's opinion, even if he is our groom. Tradition asks us not to neglect a good man's opinion, even if he is our father. I, at any rate, cannot separate the two ideas of democracy and tradition. It seems evident to me that they are the same idea. We will have the dead at our councils. The ancient Greeks voted by stones. These shall vote by tombstones. It is all quite regular and official, for most tombstones, like most ballot papers, are marked with the cross. And the cross for Chesterton is a reference to Christianity, the cross of Christ. Chesterton himself is a Catholic, a Christian, and he doesn't say a lot about Christianity in this essay, but he himself is a Christian, and ultimately he will say a lot about Christianity in the later part of the book. He says, I have first to say, therefore, that if I had a bias, it was always in favor of democracy and therefore of tradition. Before we come to any theoretical or logical reasonings, I am content to allow for the personal equation. I have always been more inclined to believe the ruck of hard-working people than to believe that special and troublesome literary class to which I belong. I prefer even the fancies and prejudices of the people who see life from the inside to the clearest demonstrations of the people who see life from the outside. I would always trust the old wives' fables against the old maids' facts, as long as wit is mother wit. It can be as wild as it pleases. I would always, he says, trust the old wives' fables to the old maid's facts. And he is going to develop the rest of his essay by appealing to fairy tales, which are passed on by tradition. And as Chesterton says, he learned about these fairy tales by his nurse. Fairy tales are passed on. They're part of the common wisdom of just people, ordinary people. And Chesterton finds in those fairy tales a wisdom, a vision that is real and solid. And so this essay is going to be Chesterton's what he calls his fairy tale. He's going to develop his fairy tale philosophy, which we will be talking about in the next few videos, but I will end at this point. If you want to read the essay yourself, just go to Google and type in The Ethics of Ellfland, G.K. Chesterton, and read it for yourself. It's a beautiful essay. And then if you read it yourself, then you could, you'll be able to understand, or at least you'll have read the essay, so when I talk about it, it'll make a little more sense to you. Okay? I'll be back in another video tomorrow. Okay?